It's great to speak to the US talk show host David Pakman from the David Pakman Show whenever we get the chance. The last week's seen politicians and lobbyists alike start to react to the terrible tragedy at the shooting at the school in Newtown, Connecticut, where 26 people died in yet another mass shooting. Now, David, you've been there for the past week or so. What's the reaction like? I mean, you're in that part of the world.
Yeah, the reaction's pretty mixed. We talked on my program, the David Pakman Show, a lot about basically two things that we focused on. Number one was the corporate mainstream media reaction, and then the other was the reaction from the right wing and or Fox News and or the gun lobby, which is really all kind of one and the same here in the US.
Yeah.
And, I've had a number of different problems with the media coverage, and of course, we've started to hear a lot of ideas, everything ranging from, well, teachers should be armed, and as usual, more guns are the solution. So it's really all over the map, but there's a lot of outrageous ideas flying around.
Interesting watching the media coverage from this part of the world. There seems to be at least a common interest to at last do something.
Yeah, there does seem to be more support for that, at least than at other times in recent history. The problem is that the more support there is, the more money pours into the lobbying groups. I mean, you have to think about it this way. The NRA, the National Rifle Association, is a good example because when guns are sold, the NRA makes money because they are essentially a lobbying group for gun manufacturers, and they're paid in part based on the profit of the gun manufacturers. So they make money, and then they have more money with which to lobby even further. When guns aren't sold as a result of groups trying to reduce the number of weapons in circulation, nobody really makes money, right? They have some donors, but they don't have any big corporate structure paying them for that success because you don't make money off of not selling guns. So it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Now, I suppose the interest in guns in the US stems all the way back to the Second Amendment, which we hear a lot about. From what I can see, it was written back in 1791. And I figured guns probably weren't as powerful or fast or as accurate or as lethal, and they were probably pointed at animals that they were going to be eaten at that stage. Guns have changed a bit.
Yeah, this is an argument that's happening now, which is that if you try to restrict, for example, President Obama and Senator Dianne Feinstein of California and some others have indicated they would support an assault weapons ban, a new assault weapons ban, which Bill Clinton put in place, and eventually that ban expired. And that is taken by a lot of conservatives as a limitation somehow on the Second Amendment and therefore bordering on unconstitutional. But as you're mentioning, the Second Amendment is really, it's very basic. It says people have men have a right to bear, as it's written, I think it says men, maybe it's people, have a right to bear arms as part of a well-regulated militia. Now, of course, a lot of the guns that people have now aren't part of any organized militia in any way, but putting that aside, what if we limited the arms that people could have to those that existed when that Second Amendment was written? Because certainly it would be hard to imagine that those who wrote that knew about the automatic weapons that would exist today.
And what would be the process of changing an amendment if it could actually be changed?
Well, there's a couple of different things that can be done. The president can do some things via an executive order, which of course would be seen as undemocratic in some cases, particularly by those who don't like the executive order because it's kind of a unilateral move. More reasonably, this would be done through the House and Senate, where bills would be put forward in both chambers, in the House and the Senate. If they pass, then they would be conferenced on, and kind of a final combination of the House and Senate bills would be put forth, sent to the president's desk. He would then sign it, and then it would become the law. There's, as I'm sure you've heard, all sorts of ways that opposition to any bill can basically filibuster, delay, or prevent this from happening. So it is quite difficult. But I think you made the best point kind of at the beginning of this discussion, which is that there does seem to be more political will than in recent time to do this.
Or if anything was going to happen, it's clearly not going to happen tomorrow. David, can I just play you a little bit of audio from a BBC report that was done about 4 days ago, referencing the Port Arthur massacre in Tasmania, in my home country, Australia, back in 1996.
Just 12 days after the shootings, Australia's state and federal governments agreed to enact sweeping new gun controls. Rapid-fire rifles were banned. All individuals had to register their weapons. But crucially, the government went further. It began a gun buyback scheme, where it purchased weapons at market value, all paid for by a temporary increase in the country's Medicare levy. The results were remarkable. In all, around 700,000 weapons were handed in, at a cost of about $300 million. In the 18 years before the Port Arthur massacre, there were 13 mass shootings. In the 16 years since, there haven't been any.
Well, David, from that, you can see that the gun buyback scheme and the whole gun control in Australia clearly worked. So if people say, oh, look, it's not going to make any difference, it can make a difference. It can make a huge difference.
It can make a difference. Now, here's the thing. I think that the Australia example is a very good one. And it's actually funny because even though Fox News, which is owned by News Corporation,
that's right, yeah.
which belongs to Rupert Murdoch, who is Australian, they actually were told not to discuss gun policy in coverage of the Newtown shootings, even though immediately Rupert Murdoch himself tweeted out saying it's time to ban these weapons just like Australia did. Putting that bit of hypocrisy aside, the counter arguments to the Australia argument are, listen, 700,000 guns. We have way more guns than that here in the US. It would be extraordinarily expensive. And in any case, we have a problem here because we're not as isolated geographically as is Australia, and therefore the illegal guns coming in from overseas and across the borders are way more significant. That's not my argument. That's the counter argument.
I was going to say the Fox News coverage has been quite bizarre. I've been watching people like Mike Huckabee the other day drawing on his faith to try and explain what happened and didn't do a particularly good job.
Right. No, he didn't. And it's incredible, really, the type of stuff that he's been saying. And, the problem I have is whenever we start making comparisons to what other countries have done or could do or whatever, there are very good comparisons. I actually agree with you. The problem is a lot of those countries that not Australia specifically, but some of the countries that are discussed don't have the same problem as the US with people wanting to go out and commit these mass shootings, in the sense that I agree we can look at gun policy in different countries, but we could probably have very relaxed gun policy in many countries and we wouldn't have these mass shootings because there's something more that needs to be discussed, and it goes beyond even the mental health component. It's something about the entire US culture and society, and the pressures and that are on people, and how people react here when they aren't able to achieve what they would call success for themselves, or they're not able to realize their goals. It's very complex, and it's not an overnight fix. That aside, the gun regulation is a part of it, because at least you can limit how much damage someone can do.
Yeah, I've noticed in the coverage the last couple of weeks, Hollywood and the whole video game industry and the violence in those games and in the films has also come under a lot of scrutiny.
Yes, it has. And, the thing there is, I've talked about this quite a bit, and we've actually had a really good professor from my alma mater, the University of Massachusetts, on to talk about this. There actually isn't evidence that violent movies and video games make people violent. It actually is counterintuitive. What there is evidence of is that violent movies and video games make people think the world is more dangerous than it actually is. And that is really the biggest effect that it has. The more we look at it, it seems like the academic research suggests the link between doing violence and seeing that stuff is actually not a very strong one. But that being said, we've seen the premiere of I forget what movie it is, but a movie that contains quite a bit of violence delayed or postponed because of the shooting. So it's definitely having some effect.
Yeah, well, I grew up watching those Warner Brothers cartoons, and they don't get much more violent than those.
No, certainly.
And I also watched The Sound of Music, and I still haven't made play clothes out of my curtains. So
right, yeah. It's funny because it doesn't the same type of logic doesn't seem to apply outside of this violence narrative.
Yeah. Just a personal question: do you own a gun?
No, I don't.
Do your friends of yours own guns? I mean, how's it discussed in your circle of friends?
Yeah, I have several friends that own guns, and none of them own these assault weapons. I can think of two friends who basically just collect old guns, and a couple times a year they go to a shooting range. They keep them in a safe all the time. I don't, it's not, it doesn't sound fun to me. For them, it's a hobby. I don't see the fun in it, but I really, I don't have a problem with the idea that people can be properly licensed and screened 100%, even when buying guns from other private parties, which is a loophole that exists here in the US. And, they can keep a handgun safe in their house. There's a lot of rural parts of this country, and I understand wanting to have a shotgun or a handgun. That I actually understand, and hey, it doesn't matter if I don't like it. That is protected by the Second Amendment. However, it's hard to imagine really needing these automatic and semi-automatic assault weapons for any reason.
Well, look, let's hope that something is done, something meaningful can happen between the politicians and the lobby groups, and the NRA might be able to take a step back to allow a few changes so this crazy nonsense just won't happen again.
Yeah, statistically, it'll probably happen again in 3 months. I mean, that's kind of what the numbers indicate. I was just looking at whether these are on the rise. There have been an average of, over 3 decades, there's about 20 mass shootings a year, and each with at least 4 victims killed by gunfire. So statistically speaking, we're not that far from the next one, and it's kind of sad to have to say that.
Yeah, well, you're right, and let's hope that, some sanity will prevail. David, great to speak to you when the opportunity presents, and we look forward to speaking to you next time.
Pleasure being with you.
That's David Pakman there from the David Pakman Show, davidpakman.com, that's Pakman. We look forward to speaking to David again on The Spin soon.